Okay, so this is April 7th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. We're recording this and we've got Brenda, Laura, Nancy, Janet, Rudy, and Izzy representing the Planning Commission here tonight. So we definitely have a quorum for any votes that are made. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining tonight. Looks like we've got 13 total folks on the call so far, so I'll be letting people in as we're talking. And just a reminder to those who have joined tonight to observe or listen in. This is a formal meeting of the Planning Commission, which means that we don't do public comment until the public comment period, which is at the end. And that will be structured comment. So it's different than the meetings that we have done in the past few weeks. So just be aware that there is a time for public comment, and that is at the end. Until that point, we ask that you keep yourselves muted because this is a meeting for the commission to discuss our next steps. Okay. So we're gonna do, so Shane is also joining us now. Wait for him to get connected. Okay, so we'll start with a review of the agenda for tonight. Hi, Shane, we're just getting started.
Hi.
So the agenda as posted was to review the discussion to date and then take some time to discuss the recommendation to the select board to form a trails committee and the specific tasks of that committee, and then public comment at the end. There were times in the agenda, those were rough estimates. So if we need a little bit more time to discuss, to review the discussion, then we can certainly take that before we move to the recommendations. And just as a reminder, because we'll be doing votes tonight, because we'll be making a recommendation to the select board, we'll use Robert's rules for that vote and discussions so that everybody's clear what we're voting on and what we're discussing at that point in time. Are there any questions from the Planning Commission folks before we get started? Janet, did you have something?
I'm not muted, sorry.
No, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so this is not the final recommendations. This is just recommendations for going forward, right?
That's correct. We're not making a policy recommendation tonight. We're making we're making a recommendation about potentially a trails committee.
Right. Okay. That's what I thought. But I just wanted to be clear. Yep. Thanks.
Yeah. No worries. Okay. Any other questions before we get started? All right. Great. So I worked with Jeff again. There's been some additional updates onto the Planning Commission page, some letters. If you've been on recently, you see that Jeff and I decided to split it into resources and public comments because it was getting a little bit too full of documentation and hard to find what you're looking for. So the public comments are generally the things that people have either submitted to the Planning Commission, the Select Board, or to me for inclusion in the what we solicited for public comment, or it's the testimony or slides that people used when they were presenting as a landowner or a trails user. Everything else falls into the shared resources category. So we've got maps and history documents and positions from the American Hiking Society that were sent to us, highway maps, Conservation Commission letter. So
just lots of different parts and pieces. And then the resource guide hasn't been updated for a month, but it still has a lot of really useful information that links to state statute language and other towns' policies. So I'd encourage you to go back and look through those things if you haven't yet. We did receive a letter, which I sent to all of you, from John Echevarria, letter from his lawyer that he has obtained the services from to talk about interpretation of the state policy or the state statutes language on use of legal trails. That lawyer's particular position is that because the select board has not voted for any use of legal trails in general, that all uses of the trails are illegal and unallowable. I don't get the sense that that is what the majority or all of the other towns in the state would go with, given the fact that all the other towns that have legal trails allow people to use them. There's not an instance where a select board's made a policy or hasn't made a policy and there's a disallowance of use. So because that is, the letter came to us from a lawyer who was citing statute and implicating the select board for lack of action, the town has not now gone to the League of Cities and Towns to get their legal opinion on the matter. And so we will have a decision in the next couple of days. However it goes, it will be another opinion to add to the mix of this discussion. So I think what this goes to shows is that there's quite a bit of complexity of the issue at hand. If we have one lawyer saying that because there's no policy, nobody can use the trails, and everybody else acting that because there's no policy, people can use the trails as they see fit and as the towns allow. So stay tuned for more information from the League of Cities and Towns about their particular position there. Any other questions about that information or where we've been or where we're going? Okay, great. So now we'll just move into the portion of the agenda about the recommendation to the select board. Again, we'll use like Robert's Rules lights for the votes and discussion here so that folks know what we're talking about and what we're sending along to the select board. So the first thing I'd like to offer for discussion and a motion is the formation generally of a trails committee. And then we can get into details about membership and tasks under separate motions. But I just want to make sure that the Planning Commission is agreed that a trails committee forming and taking on some of the additional effort is where we'd like to go.
Now, Laura,
Yes, Shane.
my question is that this is, if we suggest having a trails committee, shouldn't that be appointed by the select board? Not by us.
That's a great question, Shane. And that was point number 2 that I was hoping that we get to, is the recommendation of membership. I don't think we as the Planning Commission can form the group unless it's like a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. But I think we want this to be a multi-stakeholder. And so what I would recommend that we do is decide the structure of how we would think it would ideally work, having been in this conversation for 2 months now, to provide a recommendation to the select board so that they can make an informed decision. So we certainly can't appoint people, but we could say 1 member of recreation, 1 member of conservation, you know, X number of community members representing different viewpoints or something to that effect.
Laura,
Yes, Brenda.
I've got 2 things I wanted to bring up, and one of them would be out of line with what you're doing here, but may give everybody a little breathing space.
Yep.
One of the recommendations, this may be taken up afterwards, but I wanted to get it on the table, that I'm going to make is that we make a recommendation to the select board that while the Trails Committee is working on this, that the select board immediately put in an interim policy in writing that we keep it foot traffic for now until this is resolved. And other than that, I think the Trails Committee is a good one. I'd like to encourage that we don't have, this has been kind of an uncomfortable discussion for a lot of us and very emotional and not always productive. I hope that some of the main speakers here are not the ones that go on this Trails Committee, because I think it's going to make it very difficult for this Trails Committee to function with that forum. I think they should use these people. I think they should interview them. I think they should go to them for resources, but reaching out for other people would be great. So you probably
Thanks,
want,
Brenda.
according to Robert's rules, you would probably want us to make a motion with some of those thoughts in my mind that I'm going to go for a recommendation to the select board afterwards. You want us to make a motion right now that we will work on make a recommendation of a Trails Committee.
Yeah, if that, I think that would be the best starting place. And then we could make you could make a separate motion to recommend that interim policy of the pedestrian use only for the trails. We'd want to separate those.
Yes. So I'll make
So-
a recommendation that we have a Trails Committee to work on
Okay.
these. And the reason I'm doing this before everybody else chimes in is that, you know, a lot of items have come to light. I've learned a lot listening to everybody. I've learned a lot by my neighbors, and it certainly is a bigger issue and certainly past the initial people that were speaking that have been brought up. And there's some consequences, unintended consequences, wetland issues still to be discussed. So I'll make that motion.
Thanks, Brenda. Does somebody want to second Brenda's motion?
I second it.
Thanks, Nancy. All right, so now we can have discussion. If there is any discussion about the general idea of the recommendation of forming a Trails Committee.
So I think based on the previous discussion, the recommendation would actually be to the select board to appoint a committee. We're not actually appointing a committee ourselves.
Right.
And this has already been discussed by the select board at a February 9th meeting. That it was not very well formulated at that time and was still up for further discussion, but it was brought up that a Trails Committee and an Agriculture Committee would be helpful to the town.
Thanks, Rudy, for that historical point as well, that this had been previously voiced at a select board meeting. Any other
I think it-
discussion?
I think it'd be well for us to make the suggestions of not who, but the type of person who represents, is represented on the committee. You mentioned a rec person, somebody from the Conservation Committee, maybe somebody from the Planning Commission. At least a couple of representatives who represent the different viewpoints within the town. Whether there are volunteers who want to do that can then be, their names can be sent to the selectmen, or let them do the whole advertising process. I don't know what's the best way to go on that, but I do think that a rec person, a conservation, and at least one planning person so that they can keep us informed. And maybe two
Yeah.
others from, representing either end of the spectrum on this.
Mhm. Okay,
Laura-
let's pull that out as a separate motion,
Okay.
if that's okay, Nancy. So we'll vote first on the formation of the committee, and then let's talk next about the membership, if that makes sense, so that we're
Okay.
keeping it very clear about the different steps and decisions that we're proposing.
In my mind, I had already gotten done.
That's all right. You're moving things along.
It's late.
To back up a little bit, Laura,
Mhm.
so was the motion to the formation of a committee? So-
The motion on the table is to recommend to the select board that a trails committee be formed.
Okay, thank you.
Did we, okay, so now we're gonna vote on that?
Yeah, unless there's any other discussion about the formation of the recommendation of formation of a trails committee.
No, so we start there and then we decide how we want to recommend the committee to be composed.
Yep, and then there's specific tasks. So I would recommend that we break out membership as the next motion and then tasks as the third motion. And then we'll have like a complete package of recommendations to offer.
Okay,
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of recommending to the select board that we form a trails committee, say aye.
I,
I,
Aye.
And any opposed? All right, so great, we're gonna send that along to the select board. So now that we have recommended the formation of a trails committee, I would entertain a motion to discuss the membership of that committee if somebody feels so moved.
okay.
I'll make a motion that we develop a recommendation for the composition of the committee.
Thanks, Rudy. Any seconds?
I'll second.
All right, Shane and Izzy, thank you. I know this is a little bit more formal process than we use, but because we've got a lot of listeners and we're making a recommendation, I want to make sure we're going along so that we know exactly where we're at in the process. So, discussion of membership. Does anybody have any thoughts? Nancy shared earlier, recreation, possibly conservation and planning commission members. And I agree with one or two folks representing at least those three different town commissions.
Maybe recommend that not more than 5. What's the number? What number? I think smaller versus bigger is
Yeah.
more efficient, but
I think if you do 5, then you've got somebody that's from each of the different sides, plus those other 3. Seems like a very viable. You don't want to go too much bigger than that. I agree with you, Shane.
And I think for COVID considerations, a smaller group can travel and meet a little bit easier in person.
so I'm going to throw this up for discussion just to run by all of us. It was recommended to me that we might want to have a mediator or a process assistance with that. Are we interested in that? I did, to try and speed this along, I did get a hold of Two Rivers and asked them if they had any grants. And of course, you know, they have individuals from a listening group here in Tunbridge that are on their board, so they bowed out. So we can't turn that direction. We're gonna have to go to one of the mediation places if that's what we think. So I'm just opening it up for conversation. Do we want someone to help direct that group at all?
I think my concern is that it's like, if we do 5, and I just am uncomfortable with the ideas like one person from one viewpoint and one person from another viewpoint, because I think there's more than 2 viewpoints in, you know, points of view about what's going on. And it's a very complicated issue. I mean, maybe somebody from, you know, an ag committee too, or I know having it be a bigger group can be problematic, but I think just 2 other people other than recreation, conservation, and planning might be limiting the type of feedback that we get, or the end result. I don't know. Anybody else feel that way?
I think smaller is more workable, and that they need to go to a lot of the people we've heard speaking a lot. I mean, we've heard their viewpoints, and that group should be drawing them in to get any feedback for grants or anything that they're looking into. You know, that's gonna,
Yeah. Or somebody that has no particular, a member of the community that has not voiced an opinion either way, who might be a little bit more neutral about the whole thing, and not somebody that's a hiker or a biker or a snow machine person, or I don't know.
well, I agree with you, Janet. I brought that up, and then I'll be quiet. I don't think it should be some of the speakers that have been here. I think they should utilize these people, because it's been uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's what, I guess maybe that's what I'm kind of getting at, picking if they were to pick someone that's like been heavily involved in all the comments at these meetings, it might seem to skew it a little bit. So I agree with you there, Brenda. I think if that's what you were saying.
Yeah, so maybe that could be the recommendation, is that we recommend from the rec committee, the planning commission, and the other,
Conservation.
Conservation.
and then the remaining ones to be unbiased members of the community. And just simply leave it at that as a recommendation.
I mean, it's hard not to be biased on some level, but I think, yeah, with the whole idea not picking somebody that's been very vocal.
What about the one member from each of those committees? So that would be 3, and then between 2 and 5 additional members, so that the committee could equal up to 8.
Yeah.
And that way, if we don't get enough people participating, then the committee isn't hamstrung from the get-go, because we've said we want 7 and we can only get 6.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe a range like between 5 and 7 members, at least 1 seat going to each of the Recreation, Planning Commission, and Conservation Commissions.
Yeah.
And the remainder to be made up of
community members.
Okay. Unaffiliated?
Yeah, I think unaffiliated, yes.
What do you folks feel about that mediation or mediator? Or do you think the group should approach one of the mediation agendas and see if they can get some help drawing up their future, how they're going to address this? Just to throw it out there for conversation.
Just off the top of my head, I feel like you put somebody in that position, you've already said there's going to be controversy.
Yeah.
I
Or
mean,
confrontation, yeah.
Confrontation right off the bat. So it's almost like you need to let it work its way along, and then bring somebody in if that's the needed position. That's just,
I agree with you, Nancy. I think it's kind of setting it up for
Yourself
more self-prophesizing,
Yeah, I've only dealt with mediators, when teaching contract negotiations, and it was usually a last step, when you couldn't figure out which way you were going, prior to that. So that's just my thought. I'm okay with either way, but
I think my sense is that once we get off this platform of Zoom and people are able to talk to each other in person in this small group in private settings, without the Hollywood squares of other people looking at them, knowing that they're being recorded and uncomfortable. My hope is that we can get to a place of open conversation and find areas of compromise. And I think I would agree that if we go in with a mediator, that would set the stage of saying without words that we expect it to be hard. I also certainly think that there's plenty of folks in town or in one of the 4 towns that have mediation skills that we could ask to join as the situation develops. If we find particularly tricky points in the conversation, that they could either offer the group some additional skills to work through the conversation, or that they could become part of the conversation then at that point as like a ex officio member of this group, the Trails Committee.
Can I ask a quick question? Going back, we recommended that there's a formation of a Trails Committee. Do they go directly to the select board? Their recommendation goes directly to the select board?
That is a good question.
Or-
I was thinking that the recommendation would come jointly, essentially, to the planning commission and the select board, because we still have to recommend a policy to the select board. But I think they should be kept abreast and updated as frequently as the Trails Committee is providing information back. So I would think that they would answer to the select board. So the select board would be responsible for whatever process of getting folks on board and allowing them to do their work, particularly if they're going to be working with like Rodney from the road crew or anybody else to understand the specifics of the situation. But at the end of the day, we would have a conversation with them to say, what is your sense of this situation? Where are there opportunities for collaboration and development? Now let's work together to develop a recommendation to the select board. And then we would be the ones that put forward that recommendation, since that was our original task. Unless the select board feels differently when we pitch this to them.
I think that would be my inclination as well. In good conscience, I feel like we were asked to develop a policy so that it doesn't consume a lot of time for the select board. So to some extent, I feel like that approach makes sense. Not that we need to control it, but that the primary work of it still is part of our charge. I feel like in good conscience, we were asked to take this role.
Okay, so right now where we are on this motion about the membership is that it would be a range of 5 to 8 with at least one representative from the Recreation Committee, Planning Commission, Conservation Commission, and the remaining seats filled with unaffiliated community members.
That sounds good to me.
Is there any other discussion about membership? All right, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Great, thank you. So now we've got a recommendation for a committee. We've got a recommendation for membership. So next will be the tasks. And I would suggest that because we don't necessarily, we have a lot of pieces of the puzzle and we've had a lot of discussion, hours of discussion and many, many pages of documentation. But this is really to dig in and work through those sticky areas where we understand there to be conflicts and we understand there to be missing information about specific parts of the trails that are wet, areas or times of year that certain areas of the trails should not be traversed by anybody. You know, is there an opportunity to do a reroute? So I would just make the recommendation that as we discuss this potential motion, that we keep the tasks at a fairly high level and allow the Trails Committee to dig in as they see appropriate as their discussion and work develops. So I'd entertain a motion for us to outline some tasks for the Trails Committee to do.
I'll make that motion. As said.
Thanks, Brenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Rudy. All right. Let's discuss the tasks of this Trails Committee.
So I'll start, Laura, Brenda.
Yeah, go ahead.
So unintended consequences. I certainly got an earful from people not to add more taxes to the townspeople.
Mhm.
Speed signs, informational signs, grants, availability of grants, liability. And the liability, I know someone said, they take on liability, but if they hit I guess this goes into the class 4 roads too, but if one of my neighbors pointed out and they were kind of upset because something came down through their chickens and they were worried about going to work and coming back if they got hit and they were doing the speed limit and these bikes were going over the speed limit, which they were, it appeared to be, who is responsible for the damage to the car after they wash off the blood? That's how it was worded to me. And that was a good point. I mean, it falls under the car. So anything that's a large event, they've got to look at unintended consequences. Any large event may have to look at liability policies like horse shows have to do.
Okay, so it's generally like liability from or for event participants to protect town people.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's,
Grants,
But
so I had grants and taking into consideration damage, erosion, policing, if you had someone who got off trail, water issues. I think motorized stuff is gonna be pretty quick, but motorized, seasonal usage, sensitivity to the landowners and rerouting if possible, if it's annoying to the landowners, there's a way to get around it to be more palatable.
Mhm.
And I think the town of Tunbridge has to, I think at the end of it, they have to talk about, the town of Tunbridge has to be responsible and accountable at the very end. And if something goes wrong, people don't want to chase down some elusive horse that came through or bike, or they probably need to go to the town of Tunbridge, and that goes into the policing. Anyways, that's my little list.
so Brenda, I want to ask a question, Brenda. So when you're talking about liability, you're talking about a separate liability for like perhaps a large event that happens like the Ranger or any other sort of horseback riding event that happens.
It would almost
Liability
have
and
to
those-
be, yeah, it would almost have to be, Janet, because that's the only way that if they came to the select board and said, if that's what they ended up doing, I'm just throwing it generally out there. We leave it wide open for this Trails Committee to address a little further. But my
Or
neighbor
just-
had a good point. Does everything have to go on their insurance and it wasn't even their fault? Do people in town get notified ahead of time that there's something happening so that they can make sure that they're out of the road, that they're being more cautious?
Right, so that maybe it should be, the question should be like, what about permitting for a permit for a large event? Because we don't
Right.
have that right now. So, and I know from reading some of the other information that's been presented to us that, the Ranger was, for the 2020, they intend to send out to all members of the community notification of an event happening. But that would be part of, so permitting and the liability comes under that. That's the way I'm seeing it. But that's certainly something to think about. What, does the select board want to make a decision about having a permit for any kind of a large event in town?
Yep, add it to the
Can I,
list. Generalized list for them to look into.
can I add maybe a higher level comment at the front end, just to bear in mind as we go. I believe the concept came out of wilderness area planning. There's something called the minimal tool rule. And I would like to think about what our objectives are and what are the minimum rules that we need to ensure those objectives.
Rudy, what was the name? What'd you say? Minimal tool?
The minimum tool rule.
Okay, thank you.
It's basically a light-handed approach and thinking about ways to ensure our overall objectives are met.
Right.
I agree that I think we could, and I also appreciate Brenda's list, because I think those are all important things for us to think about. And taking Rudy's approach to say, what do we need in order to make this workable for the vast majority or the overwhelming majority of people who are impacted, either because they're trail users or they are abutters, landowners, or they live in the town of Tunbridge. And, you know, when an event happens, then at the fairgrounds, and we're all impacted if we're going down to South Royalton. So I think I would say that it seems reasonable to use this minimum standards objective to try to answer the questions that we're getting at, so that we're not creating a 40-page document that's a recommendation.
Yeah,
But something easy and understandable that most people can get behind.
I certainly agree with that. Because it could go on forever with little bits and pieces of what if, you know, I mean, you got to stop somewhere.
And I think we've heard from more than a handful of community members that Tunbridge, one of the really great aspects of this community is that we can talk to each other and work things out. And I think this falls into that category as well, where we don't need an ordinance or a law to tell us how we should be acting as good neighbors, but just some boundaries about what our expectations are for people who are using the trails and supporting that use.
I think, Laura, we have to also be realistic that we've learned, one of the things that we've learned is that there's some changes, and we've sort of, you know, there's a push, and people have recognized this area as being a really fun place to come to from outside. So, you know, I still stand by my list as an outline for
Laura?
things that this Trails Committee needs to dive into a bit.
I'd like to comment, Laura, is that I agree with you. Traditionally, that was always the case, that we work through things, we talk to each other. I don't have to like you, but we'll come to a common ground in the end. So, you know, we figure it out. But through this whole process, I've been very disappointed in some of the participants not acting in that manner. I feel like not everybody, you know, their point is so strong and emotional that they don't listen. They want their point heard, and they don't want it. They're not willing to listen to the other side. And that's frustrating for me, for somebody who's lived here my whole life, who's, you know, 8th generation, who appreciates the ability to work through things. And that's why is really important to me.
Yep.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, great points. So I wonder, Brenda, if I could offer a friendly consolidation of your task list so that we could take it down maybe into some bigger buckets.
Yep,
Um,
I'm more than welcome to friendly consolidation here.
So I was thinking information and communications about use of trails and or maybe just leave it at that, information and communications about use of trails, because that could be signage, it could be communication about events, it could be information about when trails are open and when they're not. Maybe we need a better website, or maybe every trail needs a sign. Like, we just don't know, because I think there's a lot of routes that could go down. So that would be one potential. Then I think the other one could be kinds of use and times of year for appropriate use. Because there's certainly going to be some times of year when some uses are maybe no use is good. And other times of year when maybe hiking is okay, but we wouldn't want heavier, either an event to happen or a horse trail ride to go through because of the potential damage. And so we could say, I don't know how you'd want to say that, seasonal restrictions or seasonal
Yeah,
and types of use.
seasonal issues. Period. Let them delve into
Okay.
it.
Seasonal issues. Then we should have types of use. And then I think we have this whole event discussion. What does it mean when a large event, like what is a large event? Because to some people, a large event might be 10 people, to other people, it might be 50. So what constitutes a large event? And what kinds of expectations do we have for those event hosts? So it would be like event oversight. I also think that the event, this is a side note, so I'm going off track here, but I'll be back to our consolidated list. I think that the events would be a really nice way to build a fund that can be used for continued improvement for the trails. So if we have a large event, come get a permit, they pay some amount, $1 per rider or per participant, that then goes into the town's budget to support the ongoing signage, upkeep, communications about trails as a potential, just something that popped into my brain the other day.
Laura, can I suggest that you consolidate that with possible grants? I've gotten a lot of feedback from townspeople. They do not want to increase in their taxes for out-of-staters to come up here and utilize the land. That's a quote. That's not me. That's a quote.
Yeah, so we'll put maybe sources of funding.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think the last one would be, or two more would be environmental impacts, which that could go under seasonal issues. So I'm going to plop it there because that makes the most sense to me. And then the final one would be the collaborative work with the landowners. If a trail needs to be rerouted or physical barriers to keep people on the trail, that there is that discussion with the landowners.
I got one more you're not going to like, Laura.
Surprise me.
Class 4.
Class 4, yes, thanks. That was a note that I had made that I had put on, saying that maybe this committee, that would be one of the points of intentional work with us as the Planning Commission, to work to clarify class 4 usage, because I think that's going to get into the road crew quite a bit and their ability to provide, any kind of maintenance or oversight. And I don't think we should have 10 different people going to the road crew to talk to them about this particular issue. It should be a coordinated effort. Okay, so then class 4, I'll just put class 4 roads. So to go over that, go ahead, Rudy.
There are some existing town policies about class 4 roads already, so we need to make sure we take those into account as a starting point.
Okay.
I think
And maybe
that
that's
speaks to
something-
Brenda's point about taxes in some ways, because it has been the policy of the town not to be maintaining fourth-class roads beyond the necessary.
Okay. So I wonder if the class 4 road discussion actually should stay on our plate and not go to the trails committee, because they're not trails. And then we can dig into existing town policy and understand what is already out there. And our understanding then can be informed by what the trails say, so that we can treat them similarly like how most of the other towns do, if that makes sense.
I think that's a good idea, Laura. One of the issues I think going forward is we may actually get some information from the Trails Committee with environmental concerns and water concerns that may overlap onto the class 4 as far as responsibilities of the town.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with you guys too. I think,
And
You
I think,
You just couldn't give this up, could you, Laura? We gotta.
well,
Hey, I
I
brought
think-
it up.
in terms of thinking about grants and stuff as well, there's got to be
right,
some consideration of cost effectiveness and, you know, to some extent, they need to be evaluated together, for exactly the reason Shane just mentioned. You know, if you have environmental concerns, what's it take to address them here as opposed to here? What are the access to grants for either of those options? So I think it's gonna realistically require some work.
We don't shy away from work now, Rudy, do we?
Hey, at least we get to walk outside instead of looking at a town plan over and over again.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scrolling, that was hard.
That was hard.
Hundreds of pages. Okay, so just to recap, I've got 6 high-level tasks for the Trails Committee. Information and communications, seasonal issues and environmental impacts, reroutes and working with landowners, types of use, event oversight, and sources of funding.
that sounds like a pretty good plate to hand them.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of those 6 tasks being our recommendation to the select board for the Trails Committee to undertake, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. So now we've got a Trails Committee formed, we've got the membership outlined, and we've got 6 high-level but broadly focused tasks for this committee to address. Are there any other motions that folks would like to consider regarding the committee, its functioning or its duties?
Do we need to give a timeline for, as we did these meetings and, the 4 meetings? Do we want results by a certain date?
I think that would be a good, I always like to tell my staff when things are due, so they have a goal to work towards. Do you have a suggestion, Janet?
No, I don't right now, not off the top of my head, but yes, it depends on how quickly the committee is formed, how long it takes to form the committee, and then I would expect it's going to take, at least 4 meetings like we had to put things together, because there's a lot of things to look into there. There's a lot of different ways to go. And just gathering the background for everybody, reading all the resources and everything is going to take some time. So I don't know. It would be nice if something was ready for town meeting, but
Wow.
that might be a little too close.
My experience in trying to get anybody to help us right now is this has been difficult. And I think that we're looking more like fall. Seriously, these are
Okay.
volunteers. You know, we're all
Yeah.
volunteers.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that's a reasonable thing. They've got to be able to form, they've got to be able to put their policies together where they want to go, and then they've got to get their people for information, and it takes a while.
Yeah,
Got to give them
I
a
agree
chance if
with
they
you.
want to study, a road and see what the increase is through the summer, what's actually for traffic going through, so they have some points to bring up. I think we've got to give them the time to do that. Maybe we should ask that committee what they think is, after they meet, what they think is a reasonable time, what they project to try to work on this.
You know, and the other thing you just brought up, which I thought of earlier this evening, was, you know, we don't have any documentation about how many people actually are on these trails, do we? We don't know if there's 2 people or 100 people going down Crossroad or Orchard or Baptist Hill, you know, on any of those trails. So do we want to get an idea of how many? I mean, I don't know, someone suggested like a, you know, game camera kind of thing that you would put up and see like how, because count people, I don't, for traffic, you know, because you get the feeling sometimes that there are many thousands of people out there walking around, and certainly I don't feel that way being here, but maybe there are more people on the trails than I realize. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
I think it totally depends on who you ask. You know, some would tell you,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we use this trail we've used it forever. And the next one you would say not any. The only thing I can reference to is my own experience being around these trails is I think it's relatively minimal, just by the overall impact. If 100 people walk through a trail, you're going to leave a path. If a bicycle goes through a wet area, they're going to leave a track. And I have a lot of experience with these trails, and I would say it's probably minimal use on Orchard Road and Baptist Hill. And Baptist Hill even like less than minimal. But it all depends on who you ask.
Right. Well, that's why I thought it would be, you know, I wonder if there's a way that, you know, that we could get some idea, so that, because it seems to be, like you say, you ask people and some people imply that there's like hundreds of people out there, and other people, you know, might say like you do, well, it's minimal. So maybe it would make people better if they could see numbers.
I think you let the Trails Committee work on this
Well,
subject a little bit.
I think that's what I was getting at, was, do we want to put that as one of their, can that fit into one of their tasks somehow?
Could we put it under, we could say
Potential
types and
usage.
amount of use.
And potential usage.
Well, I don't know how we would judge potential use.
Well, the only thing I could think of is if we opened up, say, right now, we'll use the Orchard Road because we know it has been sort of closed off to, say, the Ranger. What if the Ranger went through there? That would change from minimal use to heavy use, possibly.
I know, but
it's not
you know,
for me to judge. I'd rather have somebody looking at another road where they could make a judgment after when the Ranger comes through. Let them work on that and discuss this a little bit.
Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead,
ask what
Nancy.
the status of the ranger is for this summer, though? I mean, we're dealing with no recommendations at this point, no rules and of any sort.
Well, my understanding is, I was told that the ranger is on.
Yeah,
And they
For this
have no
year.
intention of using any of the trails, as far as
Right.
my understanding is. So,
So
I
leave it
mean,
up to the,
they certainly don't want to antagonize people in town.
so leave it up to the Trails Committee to think about this a little bit. They're the ones that are
Right.
going to go into it a little more. They might be looking at another area. They might look at a class 4 road that's normally minimal use. Let them figure it out.
Well, that's why I wanted to say, let's put that in there so that we ask for amount and as you were saying, Laura.
So what if, so we approve the task of understanding types of use? We could
Yeah.
put types and amount of current use.
Yeah,
And then I think that it's also going to be hard. Because we don't have people out there all the time. You know, counting folks that are on the trails, but I think we can maybe have a good estimate. Maybe this would be a great project from somebody from Tunbridge Central School. If they have to do summer projects, like science projects, how to evaluate use of trails.
Well, one of the resources that I think would be really good that I've seen, he's been kind of quiet, is Kevin Rose. He seems to have some expertise in this field.
And
Well,
he
I think-
gave some feedback along the
Mhm.
way that with our resources that were assembled for the planning forums
right.
about some sense of a realistic assessment that there are some very different levels that can be done at. And, you know, it comes with a cost if you want to get harder data. So there's significant trade-offs there. And I would suggest we'd want to be realistic about that being a bit of a rabbit hole. I think it's important to understand general trends and to understand the potential user groups, but we're not going to get highly refined data on what kind of use there is unless we want to pour a bunch of money into it, and it doesn't personally seem productive to me.
Or a grant to do something like that. But I take your point. I mean, I you know, nobody wants to spend any money if they don't have to. And we might have the information we need available at hand, but I think it would be a good idea to try and get a feel for the amount of current use.
Mhm.
Agreed, and it's not a matter of no money. I just know that if
Yeah,
there's trade-offs.
Okay,
It's
so
okay,
go,
Rudy, I'll rent out my game camera for a very,
that for a nominal fee, right?
counting my coyotes.
That's right. You get those coyotes to get off the trail.
so going back, Janet, to your original
you-
question, would we like to propose maybe like they could even join us or provide updates regularly instead of saying a date, or we could say we'd like
Right.
an interim recommendation by July so that we know where things are headed.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe have the committee get together and say, you know, we can say at a certain point, can you tell us, you know, where you think this is going and how long it's going to take?
Okay. That doesn't, to me, necessarily feel like we need to make it part of the recommendation, but more just part of the communication to the select board about
Okay,
what we think would
yeah.
work. If that sounds
That's fine.
reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. Brenda, do you want to go back to the idea that you brought up and make it into a motion about the
Yes,
friendly gesture?
The
The friendly
gesture.
gesture?
Well, I think of it in lots of different ways, like it's a de-escalation measure to limit trails to pedestrian use
Yes.
potentially.
I make a motion that we recommend that the select board immediately make an interim policy for foot traffic only while the Trails Committee is working on this.
I would second that motion.
Lori, unfortunately, you don't get to second because you're not part of the planning commission.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
That's just my opinion. Count it as an opinion.
I'll second it.
All right, so Brenda and Shane. Okay, discussion.
I just don't think that's a good idea. I think that is just antagonizing people by excluding one group over another. And I know, that's kind of my immediate reaction. If someone can convince me otherwise, I would be happy to hear what other people think. But
Well, I'll put it out there. I've been thinking about this for a while, and after reading John Chevaria's attorney's note too, this sort of addresses this for a while, that we keep it that way, and it just doesn't make it any worse than it is while we try to work through this. This obviously has become a bigger issue than any of us expected. And, you know, a lot of the landowners, understandably, you know, they didn't, you know, I'll just have to say, they didn't know what they were getting into when they bought the land, as some people have said. You knew what you bought. And there's a volume issue that is potentially out there that I personally didn't know about. And I've been slowly learning out that it has potential, and I bet most of the townspeople are not aware of it. And we want to be somewhat sensitive to it. And I think this puts everything on hold and chills the water while we address this and try to work out issues, rerouting possibilities, any of that. It just,
well, then why not just have no use? Why say foot traffic and not, you know, and eliminate everybody else? Why just say no interim policy, no use of the trails by anybody?
well, you can do that, Janet, but I think the foot traffic is probably the most minimal use that would do the least amount of harm, and it's what's already happening on these trails that are in, some of them real fragile, some of them are impassable, others are only passable during decent seasons. So they're already basically foot traffic. That's all they have been for a long time. And the crossroads is, you know, you really have to go on to the neighbor's land. So why don't we just put this in, do our work, kind of chill the waters a little bit here, and then come back at it.
I really feel that if there was going to be an upgrade to the trail, that there's actually work that needs to be done. So a trail that's just for walking needs minimal, but we start talking about opening it up to everything, it needs some serious concerns. There's water issues, there's water crossings, there's mud, there's wet areas that would have to be upgraded to do it environmentally correct. So I feel that, you know, the walking, which has been done already, is a safe thing until we figure the rest of it out.
As long as no one's going to go walking down the crossroad because they have to be on private land to do that. Right? I mean, isn't the trail has, the road is not really the trail anymore. There's been a new quote unquote trail. And actually I should interject now that when I spoke with Priscilla Farnham about, you know, the planning commission coming up to, you know, walk on the crossroad and that there would be people there, she wanted me to pass along to everybody that she does not approve of the use of the trail the way it's been currently used, which is actually off the crossroad and across her property. So I don't even think anyone, the way it sounds to me, I'm looking forward to Saturday and actually seeing the crossroad, I don't even think you can walk down the crossroad.
I
Because-
actually agree with you, Janet, and that's why we're saying just leave it walking. If you go off the land and you're on Euclid's and they don't want you over there on the Farnham land or on Deb Mullins, then you're trespassing. Without
Right.
permission, you're trespassing. So the way we're holding it here, if their trees are down and it's all eroded and they can't walk it, it is what it is. You know, they certainly can walk up on Falls Hill. They can walk on Orchard. From what I've been hearing, Baptist is pretty impassable. So we just kind of keep it at what it's been, like Shane said, right along, and work on this. There's a lot of issues to be addressed first.
Without suggesting something, that just opens it up. This has become such a issue that it just opens it up to everything. So it's either just the foot traffic, which is currently going on, or it's nothing. And I feel that the foot traffic has been proven safe. And that's for I don't have any reference to the crossroads, but I have an abundance reference to Baptist Hill and Orchard Road. You know, I've used those trails regularly. You know, it's where I live. That's my backyard. I know them inside and out.
Any other comments? My sense is that we don't know if walking is hurting the trails or not. And I've certainly seen in places where there is active trail maintenance, and the trails have only just been open to pedestrians ever, that pedestrians can have quite a bit of impact. Think about steep trails where people cut off the switchbacks and they go straight up and down the steep part of a slope, and how that creates erosion and washed out areas. So whether or not there are impacts solely due to pedestrian use, or because it's a lack of maintenance over time, or increased use, I don't feel like I'm in a position to make a judgment about what is causing the damage to the trails. And I do feel similarly to Janet, that if we're going to exclude all uses but walking, we should also exclude walking, but we should put a date on it. So it's April 7th, maybe until Memorial Day. I think that could diffuse some of the tension. It could allow the trails group to get to work. It could allow some of the trails to dry out, because it's still pretty wet out there in the woods anyway, so people shouldn't be out there anyways. And it would give people an opportunity to just have some breathing space. So those are my thoughts. I do think there probably is a majority of use coming from pedestrians, but I think if we're going to say some groups, you can't be on these trails right now, we should say all groups, you shouldn't be on these trails right now, until at least we have a little bit of time. Which that's not a friendly amendment, Brenda. That's like a total different motion. So we'll have to close up your motion on the table, or vote to approve it before we move forward. So is there any other discussion to Brenda's motion about limiting trails use right now to all but pedestrians?
It's a recommendation to the select board to have an interim policy until the Trails Committee.
But,
So-
And
but
ultimately, it's the select board that would make this decision. If they
Right.
think it's a good idea, they're gonna vote on it. If they choose not, then they'll vote not to. Based on, it's their responsibility to oversee any plus or minus troubles with the trails. It's their responsibility. This is just a recommendation. To recommend that nobody uses it is so, according to everything else, that would mean a landowner couldn't even walk on it. Correct?
Well,
That's not true.
no,
Okay,
that's
okay.
not true.
That's fine, but that's what it felt like to me. That's what it sounded like to me.
No, I would never imply that a landowner wouldn't be able to use that. I meant recreational use by the walking group or
So,
people
it should-
hiking and things like that.
So by permission of the landowner, I could walk on it?
I suppose so, but I mean, and I think there's got to be this can't be like till the Trails Committee comes up with the thing, because if you're talking, it's not going to happen till the fall. That's not really gonna, I can't imagine how that's gonna fly. But if like Laura was saying, it's just for maybe a short period of time till the Trails Committee can decide, which direction to go, then, this interim closure, might be acceptable.
This is a recommendation up to the select board.
Right,
That-
the recommendation
dec-
would be an interim closure just for a short period of time, not, because Brenda I think, wasn't your motion saying until the Trails Committee completed their work?
Yeah, and I'm going to stand by that, because for us to expand it into all the things we talked about, motorized vehicles, unmotorized vehicles, which motorized vehicles, to bicycle, I want to wait, let me finish. I
Okay.
want to wait until we're done looking at the water issues. We're looking at everything else. We have not seen damage by the walking group so far, or walkers going through there. And I just kind of want to hold as is while we work on this. There's some work to be done. If we do it for a short period of time because we think that's going to alleviate some of the feelings, I think that's false. I think we've got to come up with more solid recommendations at the end of working with the whole Trails Committee on incorporating the landowners, the water issues, everything I've said before. And to just say we're going to go until mid-April or end of April, and then bam, everything's wide open. And I can, yoo-hoo, I'm going to go up there with my ATV until the Trails Committee comes up with something, is not, it's not good enough.
I'm gonna go back to the minimum tool rule and think about what's our objective here. I guess that leads me to think that closure is not what we're after. If we're trying to make people aware of what the issues are, and if we want people to be familiar with what those issues are, closure does not seem like that's going to meet that objective. One thing that I wonder about is appropriate signage. Can we post these roads to say these roads are in rough shape right now? We don't think they're really appropriate for much beyond foot traffic. But I'm not necessarily willing, I'm not gonna, no, that's not the right. But we don't know what's damaged the roads. And I guess I'm really reluctant to say it's one type of use or another. There's some part of me that wants to trust people's judgment. If we post these roads and say these roads have issues right now, they're under evaluation, use appropriately.
That Rudy, that's the town of Sharon actually did that. A property that borders our family's property. It's a legal trail that goes through there, and they posted a sign that says this trail is under review. It's a sensitive area. Use it with respect and all of that. Whole event was charged by the landowners from, because that's a motorized vehicles can use that trail. So it was charged by the landowners' concerns of nighttime traffic and a disturbance to them. So that's why it was prompted, but that was Sharon's solution.
And did
That
it
it-
work for them? Did the landowner feel, was the landowner comfortable with that? Did it work out well to have that signage?
Currently working, but I don't know what the impact is. I think people still are using the trail. At what hours, I don't know, but it
Yeah.
made people aware of the situation. But they were looking at a closure of the trail. That was their language. And I did listen in on a couple of the meetings because it was impactful for me. And that was their discussion. No different than this. They don't really know what to do, but that was their idea, was to put that signage up to educate people.
Right.
I'm not an advocate for signage, but you have to tell people stuff. And
Yeah.
but it is expensive. Signs are expensive, and but that's up to the select board.
I like the idea of the signage, just letting people know, because we've talked about this, that education has been brought up in the other meetings, that education about trail use is important for, maintaining the trails for everybody, no matter what you want to do, to teach people, to just remind people to be respectful of the land and the landowner.
Well, that's all nice thinking, but when you say it like that, that allows me to go up there with my ATV tomorrow.
I didn't.
Has that
realize-
happened?
I haven't done it yet. You're right. No, but what I'm saying is that this summer I had some issues with, there were some people coming into town and had nothing to do, thank God this has nothing to do with bikers. And this was UTA and ATV people, and they didn't know the area, and they were stopping at my driveway and a few others and starting to come up. They were looking for a place to go. They were looking for things to do. So yeah, we can put the signage up. I'm okay with that. I think, asking people to be respectful, that the trail is under review and it's very sensitive, and see how it works for you. It wouldn't take much to screw it up. And if it does, then we'll have to readdress it. But I still think the easiest thing was to just have an interim hold on everything while we evaluate the whole system, and just keep it the way it's been at foot traffic until we come up with a conclusion. And I guess I'm being stubborn about that. I don't think that's offensive. I don't think anybody's in that big a hurry. It's a very small section. There are other ways to get around everything.
So I'm gonna make a friendly amendment to Brenda's motion. If Brenda sees it as friendly, you can accept it or you cannot. I would recommend that we post signs on the trails that indicate that they are under review, that they are in a sensitive state of being, they are not for motorized use, and that any users need to both respect the trail and the property owners while the trail is under review. And we go from there, so that we're not saying walkers yes, cyclists no. We are saying ATVs no, or motorbikes no, because we know that's going to be an issue, and is generally
What
been
about
discussed.
e-bikes? What about e-bikes?
No.
Yeah, I think anything that is has a motor, is motor powered.
How is the impact any different? How is the impact any different?
Shane, I don't know, but I'm trying to get us to a place where we can agree on something, knowing that this is a recommendation to the select board. And there is 1,000 ways, what about somebody who's running with cleats on versus somebody who's walking in tennis shoes? The impact there is going to be different, but we can't say you can't run. So I think, taking Rudy's advice to go with the simple solution that is amenable to our goal, which is finding a policy that is respectful of both the opportunity for people to use the community asset and the landowners. We should start from a place of respect from the users and go with that people are going to make good decisions. With that being said, I think if people get out there and start ripping up the trails, and we can see like this trail was in this state when we walked it in April, and now it's June and it's awful, terrible erosion. There's been hundreds of people through here. It clearly needs to be closed, or we need to reduce who can use it. Then I think we can cross that bridge, or the select board can cross that bridge when that eventuality does or does not occur. But to say it's going to occur because of one group's use over another group, I think is starting from a place of distrust, and saying that one group is bad and another group is good. And I don't feel comfortable with that right now.
And that's fine. I guess my biggest reference is, and maybe somebody can answer this for me, but and it's reference to the Orchard Road Trail, is there's a waterway that you have to cross. There is no way around it. It's like going through a brook. So when you go on foot, you walk it. But I do know that, you know, vehicles really shouldn't be going through of any sort through a brook. Is there any regulation or reason why that they should or they shouldn't be? That's my only, I guess my reference is to that waterway.
So you go through it, you know, I just wish that we had this discussion after I was able to see all these places. But are you saying, Shane, that you can walk through this waterway and not do any damage, but, or you have to walk around it, but do you walk right through it? Is that what you're saying?
No, well, it's like crossing any brook. You have to step on stones. If you step in it, you're gonna get your feet wet. But
Right,
you have to
okay.
step on the stones, but a bicycle is gonna have to run through it.
Right,
That's my, you know.
yeah.
Right. I don't know if it would help simply because I'm on the crossroad and I walk through.
You know,
Lori,
it's
right now
not
you can't
fine.
give any
Okay.
comment.
Okay, that's
There-
fine. I just didn't know if it would be
Yeah.
useful since I go through there. That's all.
At public comment period, you can do that.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. It's
No, I
okay.
just wanted to offer. I didn't
Yeah.
know.
Thanks. Okay, so I feel like we should vote on Brenda's motion, and if it does not pass, then somebody else can make a different motion, or we can leave it to the select board to make a decision, as Shane duly noted, that we can say that there was a concern about current use of the trails, and there was a couple of suggestions that were put forward, but we couldn't come to consensus on it, and let them make a decision. So I do think we should vote on Brenda's motion because it's hanging out there. And we've had some discussion on it, unless anybody else would like to discuss Brenda's motion, which is an immediate and effective until the Trails Committee comes up with their recommendations, that the trails be foot traffic only.
As the alternative to that, before we vote,
Mhm.
the putting signs up saying they're under review, they're sensitive, blah, blah, blah. That is also could be an interim policy or an interim position.
Mhm. Yeah,
Would it be open to all traffic or just foot traffic?
Certainly no ATVs or motorized. I mean, your thing that you were commenting on.
Yeah,
is
so I feel
that
like, yeah, that would be a
immediate-
different motion.
Yeah, but
Okay,
would it be an immediate recommendation that they use that as an interim piece until there has been a policy formed?
yeah, we could certainly recommend that to the select board.
Just
So let's vote on Brenda's motion. Again, the motion was that the trails effective immediately and through the point that the Trails Committee comes up with a recommendation are open to foot traffic only. Those in favor say aye.
I,
Okay, so that's Brenda and Shane. Those opposed say nay.
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 Okay, the nays have it. Would anybody like to offer another motion?
I move that we suggest putting up some signs in reference to it being sensitive areas under review. And the exact signage, I mean, wordage, I mean, I guess we could discuss that, but to put some, at least put some signage.
Now, this is a recommendation, Shane, to the selectmen. that
Correct,
They carry through in this particular manner, right?
correct.
Okay, using respect and no motorized anything.
Correct.
I second that motion.
Oh my God, Izzy's awake.
I'm here, Brenda. I'm listening. I'm just
All
boiling
right.
away.
I know you're feeding that fire.
That's it. Gotta, she eats.
All right, so Shane has made a motion and Izzy has seconded that we recommend to the select board that we post signage that the trails are sensitive areas under review and they're not to be used by motorized vehicles. Is there any other discussion?
I think the only other thing to add into that is if there's any abuse of that, it's just a side note to the select board. If there's any abuse to that and we see damage happening, that we quickly reevaluate.
Right.
While we're working on the issues of water, runoff, wetlands, wildlife, blah, blah.
I agree with that, Brenda. And I think what we're doing is being a little more proactive than what the status quo was, which I think is a good thing. Hopefully, I just don't know if we can really close it down. And I think that's a good compromise, I guess, in my mind.
Yeah, I put my gun away.
Thanks, Brenda. At least we're all far away from you.
I'm never gonna come up your road again, so.
Okay, any other discussion on the current motion about signage? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries. Any other motions or recommendations to the select board that the planning commission would like to bring up?
It's not a motion, but a recommendation that at the end of the day, I think they need to wrap their head around that they should be the last one in line of accountability for anything that's decided.
Yeah,
And legally, it looks like what we found out is they are the cornerstone. So anybody working on the trails, permission to work on the trails, we want to make sure they don't, what if they cut a tree off the neighbor's property, and that can have consequences.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they know, but it doesn't hurt to remind them.
Yeah, I think they do too. But people have told me that. I'm just giving feedback from people listening. The select board better be in charge of this thing.
Sure. All right, hearing no other motions, we can move to public comment. We'd put 20 minutes on the agenda. I know we're about 20 minutes behind, so we will respect the 20 minutes that we put on the agenda. So again, if you could raise your hand. I see Todd, you've got your hand up and you've got your hand up. We are going to limit public comment to start 2 minutes per person. And everybody will get a chance to speak before you speak again, just so that we've got some ground rules in place. I'll be timing it. And I will gently and then persuasively ask you to stop speaking after 2 minutes is up. I'm going to start with the folks on the phone. We've got 2 folks on the phone. Do either of you want to offer public comment? And if you do, if you could just start with saying your name.
I have no public comment at this point. This is Betsy Geiser.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Betsy. And it looks like Kevin is the other caller. If you're all set, Kevin, we can move on to the folks who have their hands raised. And if you change your mind, just start talking.
I'm all ears, Laura.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. All right, Todd, you get the floor first. You've got 2 minutes. Oh, but you're still muted.
How's
There you
that?
go.
Hear me now?
Yep,
Okay.
you're good to go.
So I'm going to read from a note that I posted to you this morning, which I'm sure will be put up on the website with the other comments. This is taken from the draft town plan, and it refers to a lot of what we talked about tonight. Under section F, other modes of travel, non-motorized use, which Nancy and Shane both brought up. Many residents bike or walk on town roads in Tunbridge. The rural nature of most of Tunbridge makes bike and pedestrian travel reasonably safe. However, bike and pedestrian travel along Route 110 is less safe due to higher traffic volume and speed and a lack of available shoulders. Tunbridge has 2.45 miles of legal trails, all of which can be used by the public for hiking, horseback trail riding, road bike riding, mountain bike trail riding, backcountry skiing, and snowshoeing. I'm going to skip around a little bit here. I feel quite strongly about public access to all of our trails while recognizing the need for reciprocal responsible stewardship by both users and adjacent landowners. Many participants in this discussion have focused on trail sustainability by limiting access during wet times of the year, which we've talked about on this meeting, signage when necessary to remind users about trail etiquette. We've also talked about that. And the pending formation of a town trails committee to oversee communications, maintenance, and education about current trails as well as future trails. All very encouraging. I guess I have a question as far as the town plan, and we know that it's been languishing for quite a while, the revised town plan. Is that going to be held in abeyance until the end of this legal trails saga, as I like to call it? Do you have an answer for that?
Thanks, Todd. Great timing because you're 5 seconds away there. So my understanding is that we, as the Planning Commission, have delivered the new draft town plan to the select board, and the select board has it under their purview to bring it up for discussion and vote and adoption or not. And so I have had no communication about their timeline or their plan for that conversation. So that question would be more appropriately delivered to the select board.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, next up is Anne and Ken. I think you're muted. You are muted now. You were unmuted.
Okay, sorry.
There you go.
Thanks, you guys already discussed a lot of the concerns that we have. Thank you for voting for the signage. We think that's the right way to go and not limit access at this point, but opt for education. You all are visiting the trails this weekend, is that correct? Okay, we think you'll find them in better shape and more passable than they've been described. The other thing that I wanted to say, as far as membership on the trail committee, I do have some issues with the idea of trying to get people on the committee, community members who are unbiased or who have not been so vocal, only because you might, I mean, there's still the possibility of picking somebody who hasn't been vocal, but they could be somebody who's biased towards land over rights over public access or vice versa. So I just sort of think that's a moot point, and I want to tag on to what Shane said, that I would almost rather see people on the committee who are passionate about this subject and have them work together to work out the differences and come to a viable solution that suits everybody. The last thing I wanted to say is I do want to make a clarification about e-bikes as an e-bike rider, because there's been a lot of discussion about that. There are 3 classifications of e-bikes. One is fully motorized and is not subject to trail riding. Mine, for example, just has a battery assist. It does not go over 20 miles an hour, and it is classified for trail use. And frankly, it's the only way an old lady like me can get up a hill. And if you've seen me ride, you know I don't go anywhere near 20 miles an hour. So I would just like to make that distinction and not just unilaterally rule out all bikes. Thank you. Did you want to say anything? Okay.
All right. Thank you. Does anybody else have a comment that they would like to make at this point? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. My dog has a comment to make though. That's what she says. Anybody else comments? Not, hey. Okay, Todd, you still have your hand up, so we can go back. If you have anything else you'd like to say, you can have one more shot at it and then see if anybody else has a comment to make.
Thank you, Laura. I was having trouble. I'm using the computer at the studio. Yeah, I just want to get to a last point, which once again, I think you'll be posting at your very thorough summation of all of these meetings. I conducted an interesting survey among nearby town officials, and these included select board members, administrative assistants, and in one case, in the case of Norwich, the town manager, regarding their town's respective policies concerning their legal trails. Every one of these surveyed towns, I'll name them, have policies nearly identical to the extract that I just referenced before that is in the draft town plan right now, dealing with non-motorized use of legal trails. And the towns that basically have the usage that we currently have, non-motorized use by all those that I referenced before in the draft town plan include Barnard, Braintree, Brookfield, Chelsea, Norwich, Pomfret, Randolph, Rochester, Sharon, and Stratford, as Shane was discussing a little bit earlier. The reason I'm not mentioning Bethel and Royalton in that list is because they do not have any legal trails. I went to the Department of, or the AOT, to find out. It's really interesting. If you want to see what the legal trail numbers are around the state, they range from 0 to, I think Chittenden has 48 miles of legal trails. So there's a lot going on out there, and I'm really hopeful that Tunbridge makes the right move and doesn't sort of be the one exception of all those area towns that I just read. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. All right, last call for public comment tonight. Anyone else? Michael Saka, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting hearing the discussion that it sounds like there's like 2 sides, but really I'd like to propose another viewpoint, my own, which is I'm not a bike rider, but and I'm usually way overloaded with equipment whenever I go, so I'm walking these trails. I don't have a lot of interest in biking them. And so this other viewpoint, I guess, would be a user that wants to see them used open for all uses. That I'm a walker who wants to see them open for all uses. Thank you.
Even pogo sticks?
Yep.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, any other public comment?
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second it.
All right.
All those in favor?
Since there's no other public comment, I'll entertain Shane's motion and Brenda's second to adjourn for the night. The select board meeting is next Tuesday. So for folks that are interested in joining that meeting, it is coming up. I believe it's on the 13th, or maybe it's on the 20th. I'm not looking at my.
So 13th.
Thanks, Brenda, for confirming. So that's when we'll be pitching the recommendations. So all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Could I just jump
Oh.
in for 1 second?
Yeah.
We're meeting on Saturday, but I haven't seen anything about where we're meeting and what time we're meeting.
I believe
Did I
that
miss that?
the planning commission members will get additional details as they are
Okay.
developed by Brenda, who's leading
Okay.
this expedition.
Okay. All right,
Well,
thank you.
Janet, you're on this committee.
I know, but I didn't hear anything. I didn't get any, so that's what I'm asking.
Well, I wrote an email to both you and Izzy.
Oh,
saying, could you contact the landowners on,
I did.
Yeah. and I was
did see
gonna,
that. I can talk with you separately about it, Brenda. That's okay. I didn't know if.
Izzy,
it
you
had been
did get
posted.
you did get my directives to you, right? Izzy?
I did.
All right, yeah.
I wouldn't ignore you, Brenda.
Yeah.
All right, so
No,
back
'cause
to the
she's got
vote
that
to
gun.
adjourn.
Yes,
You
Yes.
Three Trails
Aye.
Committee. All right,
Aye.
are we gonna adjourn?
yes, you're back.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
thank you. Meeting adjourned, 8:12. All right,
Good
thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
We'll see you again
good night.
soon.
Thank you.